Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that everything you thought you understood about money no longer works. Yesterday, your savings could buy a house. Today, they can barely buy bread. Your paycheck loses value before you even receive it. People don't carry wallets anymore. They drag bags and wheelbarrows filled with cash just to buy basic necessities. This isn't a movie plot. This is what happens when a currency collapses. It's called hyperinflation, and it has destroyed real countries, real economies, and real lives far more often than most people want to believe. We trust money because we assume it's stable. We assume its value will hold from one day to the next. But history shows how fragile that belief really is. And when that trust breaks, it doesn't just ruin bank accounts, it shakes entire nations to their core. Governments fall. Families lose everything. Society stops functioning the way it's supposed to. Today, we're stepping into 5 moments in history where people watched their money turn into meaningless paper and lived through the consequences. And as you listen, keep something important in mind. Inflation doesn't arrive with alarms. It doesn't show up loudly. It starts softly, unnoticed, and by the time people finally see what's happening, the damage is already spreading. Picture Germany in 1923. World War I had left the country buried in debt. The reparations bill placed on Germany was so massive that paying it back felt impossible. The government, desperate and cornered, turned to the easiest solution they had: printing more money. At first, it felt like a fix, then prices doubled. Then doubled again. And soon, the entire economy was on fire. By late 1923, the German mark was almost worthless. A simple loaf of bread cost hundreds of billions of marks. People burned stacks of currency to heat their homes because it was cheaper than firewood. Children played with bricks of banknotes the way you'd play with building blocks. But the real damage wasn't just the money. It was the trust that disappeared with it. Once society loses faith in its currency, every system built on that trust collapses: contracts, salaries, savings, commerce. Everything breaks. And that breakdown helped create the desperation and chaos that later opened the door for extremist leaders. The economic trauma didn't just hurt Germany. It reshaped history. Decades later, another country repeated the same mistake. Zimbabwe, in the early 2000s, was facing political isolation and a collapsing agricultural sector. Productivity was falling, industries were weakening, and the government's response was, once again, the printing press. Prices began to rise. Then spin out of control. Then explode. By 2008, inflation was so extreme that prices doubled every single day. The government printed notes with absurd numbers: $10 million, $100 billion, $100 trillion. Eventually, the currency became such a joke that the country dropped it entirely and switched to foreign money just to function. The human cost was far worse. People lost their pensions overnight. Businesses collapsed. Skilled workers fled to other countries just to survive. Paper money turned into dust, while only real assets, land, skills, resources kept their value. And then there's Hungary in 1946, often considered the worst hyperinflation ever recorded. After World War II, the country was shattered. The government started issuing the peng, then printed it at unimaginable speed. Prices doubled not every day, not every hour, but every 15 hours. The inflation rate reached numbers so large they barely make sense, a 4 followed by 16 zeros. The currency became so worthless that the government kept creating new versions: the milpeng, the bpeng, each one collapsing almost as fast as the last. Eventually, the entire monetary system had to be abandoned. Savings disappeared. The middle class evaporated. And once again, trust, the foundation of any currency, was gone. Move forward to the 2010s, and you see Venezuela, a country rich in oil and resources but crippled by corruption and economic mismanagement. The government printed money to cover deficits, fund failing programs, and maintain political control. Prices began rising slowly, then quickly, then violently. Soon, grocery stores were empty, hospitals ran out of medicine. People bartered for food. Millions fled the country, creating one of the largest refugee crises in the Western Hemisphere. Venezuela's story is a modern tragedy. A reminder that vast natural wealth means nothing when the money used to trade it becomes worthless. The country sits on the world's largest oil reserves, yet its people starve. It's a stark lesson in how political decisions can unravel an entire economy. Finally, we look at the Roman Empire. This one is different. It unfolded over centuries, not months. Rome didn't have a printing press, but it had another way to devalue its currency: debasement. Emperors would mint new coins like the silver denarius with less and less precious metal. They'd melt down old coins, mix the silver with cheaper metals like copper, and produce more coins to pay soldiers and fund projects. At first, no one noticed. But over time, people realized the new coins weren't pure. They started hoarding the old, more valuable coins and spending the new, debased ones. Trust in Roman currency eroded, prices soared. Trade became difficult. The economic instability weakened the empire from within, contributing to its eventual decline and fall. It was a slow-motion hyperinflation, showing that even the mightiest empires aren't immune to the consequences of devaluing their money. So, what do we learn from these stories? Whether it's printing money, debasing coins, or reckless spending, the result is always the same: a loss of trust. Money is a social agreement. We all agree that this piece of paper or this number on a screen has value. But when that agreement is broken by those in charge, the system falls apart. These historical events aren't just about economics. They're about people. They're about the baker who can't afford flour, the teacher whose salary becomes worthless, the family that loses its life savings. Hyperinflation is a silent thief that steals the future. It's a warning from history that financial stability is fragile, and the trust that underpins our modern world should never be taken for granted. Understanding these collapses helps us see why sound money and responsible governance are so critical. Because when the value of money is destroyed, much more than wealth is lost. Thanks for watching. If you found this look into history insightful, please like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the forces that shape our world. See you next time. Imagine earning your paycheck and needing to spend it within the hour before it becomes worthless. In 2018, Venezuela's inflation surpassed 1,000,000%. Supermarkets stood empty. Doctors and engineers fled the country, taking low-paying jobs just to survive. Bartering, a system from the distant past, made a comeback as a way to get by. The government kept trying to fix it, adding zeros to the currency, then removing them, then changing the bills entirely. But none of it worked. The hyperinflation didn't just destroy the economy, it destroyed the lives built on it. And just like in every other historical case of hyperinflation, only those who owned real, durable assets managed to hold on to their wealth. Let's rewind to Yugoslavia in the 1990s. War, sanctions, and political collapse caused the economy to completely unravel. In 1993 alone, inflation hit over 300,000,000% per month. Prices doubled every couple of days. The government frantically issued one currency reform after another, but it was useless. People gave up on the official money, turning instead to German marks and US dollars. The national currency became so devalued it was literally used as scrap paper or kindling for fires. Different countries, different decades, different cultures, but the pattern is always the same. A crisis hits. The government starts printing massive amounts of money to cover its costs. Trust in the currency evaporates. The currency collapses, and society begins to fracture. This brings us to the obvious, and maybe uncomfortable, question. We know this has happened before, but could it happen again? Many people assume that our modern world is just too smart, too stable, too controlled for something like that. But let's look at the facts. Today, global debt levels are higher than at any point in history. The United States alone carries over $34 trillion of national debt, and that number is climbing every second. For more than a decade, central banks all around the world printed trillions of dollars. The goal was to push markets up and keep economies stable. And for a while, it seemed to work without any major consequences. Inflation stayed low, economies grew, and people felt secure. Until, suddenly, it stopped being harmless. In 2021 and 2022, prices started climbing aggressively. A perfect storm of energy shocks, broken supply chains, war in Europe, and yes, the years of excessive money creation all collided at once. Central banks went from printing money to panicking. They jacked up interest rates. Markets began to shake. And everyday people felt the pain in their grocery bills, their rent payments, and their stagnant wages. Questions that people thought they'd never have to ask in a modern economy started coming back. What actually gives money its value? Who controls that value? And what happens if our trust in the system breaks down again? To be clear, we are nowhere near hyperinflation right now. But the warning signs aren't just in rising prices, they're in the assumptions we make. The assumption that printing money has no long-term consequences. The assumption that governments can borrow an infinite amount of money. The assumption that someone will always step in to fix the system. These are the exact same assumptions that were made in Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Hungary, and Yugoslavia. The only real difference today is the scale. For the first time in history, the entire global economy is interconnected, driven by debt, and heavily dependent on the actions of central banks. If trust breaks this time, it wouldn't just be one country collapsing, it could be a systemic global event. So what does all of this mean for you? You can't control national debt or what central banks decide to do, but you can control your own exposure to risk. You can control your habits, your savings, and the financial decisions you make every day. The lesson from every major hyperinflation in history is the same. Real wealth isn't just paper money. Real wealth is purchasing power. It's skills that are always in demand, it's land, it's hard assets. It's your professional network, and it's your ability to create value even when the system around you is shaking. Printed money is always the first thing to lose its value. Tangible assets are what survive the longest. And trust, above everything else, is the true foundation of any currency. The moment people stop believing in their money, the game is over, and rebuilding that belief can take generations. Inflation punishes the unprepared. It moves quickly. It compounds silently. And it hits the hardest on the people living paycheck to paycheck, the people who have the least room for error. This is why financial education isn't just about getting rich. It is about protecting yourself from risks that most people never see coming until it's too late. Protecting yourself today doesn't mean living in fear. It means living with awareness. It means reducing unnecessary debt, diversifying where your money is held, learning skills that hold their value in any economy, and building a lifestyle that doesn't require constant financial pressure to maintain. Inflation is a silent tax, a slow erosion of your financial freedom. That is, unless you know how to guard against it. Hyperinflations were never accidents. They were the predictable result of decisions, crises, and beliefs that went unchallenged for too long. But now you've seen the pattern. You understand how a currency collapse truly unfolds. And the next time someone tells you, that could never happen here, you'll know exactly what history has to say about that kind of confidence. If this shifted your perspective or helped you understand money differently, stay with us here on Legacy of Money. History doesn't repeat perfectly, but it does leave clues. And we'll keep showing you where to look. Thanks for watching.